Welcome to Perspective in Practice. I'm your host, Rachel Saathoff, and today we have with us Executive Director at Partners in Diversity, Jenny Kim. How are you today, Jenny?
Great. Thank you, Rachel.
Awesome. I would love for you to just kind of start off and share a little bit about your origin leadership story.
Ooh, I'm not sure if there is such thing as an origin, right? It's like as a leader, you kind of somehow, it's not an intentional journey, I would say. It's an opportunity that comes up and you either seize it because you must.
Yeah.
Um, I never saw myself as a leader when I was younger. I was kind of the stereotypical nerd, science geek. Went to UCLA, majored in microbiology and molecular genetics, and thought that I would do biomedical research.
Yeah.
And then once I got into business world, seeing that there weren't people who looked like me,
Yeah.
especially, Asian American women in tech industry, I was actually the only one in my company who
Oh,
was in leadership role. And I never saw myself as a person who could be speaking in front of an audience or presenting in front of CEOs. But when it came up, I didn't think much about it. I just knew that that was my job
yeah.
and that I needed to do it. That um, in some ways, it didn't occur to me when I was doing that. But looking back, I think in some ways, I was very naive. I didn't question why I was there, what I was doing. And I feel like in some ways, not being aware that I was alone kind of helped me be brave, you know? I learned a lot actually from a white male executive who really taught me how to engage in conversations with C-suite people, how to present myself, how to understand financial documents. And, with my undergraduate degree not being very helpful in business world, I think having a sponsor, an executive sponsor who really helped me, that made a big difference as well too.
Yeah, definitely. I love that because we just recently put together a project kind of helping um, people of color move into C-suite roles in their organization. So I'm curious from you, what are some of those things that you feel like really helped you outside of just mentorship and sponsorship? What are some of those things that you learned from him and helped you besides being, young and naive?
I think any leader needs to really understand how to read financial statements. It's very important. Doesn't matter if you have communications background, if you are, strong writer, speaker, if you think you have business strategy, you really, really need to understand financials,
Yeah.
right? I always say you can tell an organization's true priorities based on where the money goes.
Yeah.
And he would just have me sit next to his desk and have me look at his Excel spreadsheets, and then he would go over patterns and things to look out for, like why were some numbers more important than others. And so I really learned from basically a chief operating officer level person
Yeah.
how to look at financials and looking at it from not like an accounting perspective, from business strategy perspective.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think that's such a good insight for people to understand because you can look at them from such different perspectives. And, I also think that sometimes, even just from the accounting perspective, they're always trying to make numbers look as low as possible. But sometimes you need numbers to look higher for different things. And so I think it's really important that people are aware of what are these things? How are we using them? How are we using it for forecasting strategy, different things. And I think a lot of people don't always necessarily understand that or realize and understand how is what we're doing impacting the business.
Exactly. And I think that's even more critical as a nonprofit.
Mhm.
Just because we have nonprofit as our type of organization doesn't mean that you should look at your financials. I think as a nonprofit, it's more important to find out the limited resources you have. And if you have donors and funding that's specified, you need to be really more intentional about how that money goes and how it gets used.
Yeah.
Um, so I think the fact that I come from business background and the fact that I am very much of a numbers and financial person,
Yeah.
really, I think actually makes our nonprofit stronger because, again, I'm looking at it from ways of improving kind of outcomes and impact from limited resources.
Yeah. So I'm curious, how did you get on the radar of was it the COO that was helping teach you this? How did you get on
Yes.
the radar of him for people that are wanting to kind of have that mentorship? How did you get on his radar for him to be like, "Hey, I want to teach you this. These are things that you need to learn." Was it that you approached him, he approached you, he saw something in you that was different? How did that relationship go?
I think it was the fact that also, when I went into my corporate job, I worked for an IT company. And initially, because of my undergraduate degree, I started in inventory management, right? I mean, it's not like you can go into sales and marketing from microbiology and molecular genetics. So they put me in inventory management, which was fine. And then I was going to go back to graduate school, and the marketing director came to me and said, "Hey, Jenny, I love the fact that you have a science degree. I wonder if we can use kind of research methods into strategy and marketing." And so she brought me over, and I loved that job. I had an opportunity to travel all over North America and then build relationship with some of our key clients. And then some of our clients liked me so much that they kept talking me up to their sales liaison or the sales managers and VPs. And then I thought Jenny should be in sales. And so I moved over to sales. So within like, I would say 3.5, 4 years, I moved three different entire departments.
Yeah.
And I think that's what actually caught my, executive's attention. The fact that I was able to move from one department to another that seemed kind of different. And he knew kind of my background about, being a science major. He knew that I was very good at numbers. And he told me that he could see me being a CEO at one point,
Yeah.
and he really thought that that I should have an opportunity to try different things. And I think in some ways, he felt like, he didn't have as much opportunity in a corporate environment to mentor someone who was willing to change. And he just told me, he said, come meet me at my office, once a month. Give me like 2 hours of your time. And he would just chat with me about what he was doing. And we called him Dollar Bill. That was actually his name was Bill, but we called him Dollar Bill. And he just was, I don't know if he did this with anybody else. I didn't hear it, but I just am very grateful that he did that
Yeah.
because I think his exposure and his guidance, made me the person I am today.
hmm Yeah. No, that's awesome. I love that it sounds like you had a leader in your life that was creative enough to be like, "Hey, how can we take your background here and apply it to here?" So I think that's an interesting perspective of leadership, is that creative part that people sometimes miss. But then I also love that you were so willing to kind of just be like, "Well, I don't know how to do it, but I'll try."
Yeah.
Move from this department to this department. And that flexibility and kind of that mindset of flexibility, of adaptability, is interesting. Where do you think that mindset comes from? Was it something that you kind of learned at a young age, or like did is that just an intuitive thing for you? Like, how did that come to be?
I think it's a survival skill you get as an immigrant.
Okay.
I'm an immigrant. I came to the US when I was 14 years old, not speaking any English. And I started my education, in English as a second language class. And, you have this thing like, you're thrown into this world where you don't look like anybody around you. I grew up in San Diego County. So there were no other like Korean immigrants in the
Yeah.
school that I was at. I was the first one until my sister came.
Yeah.
And I think I knew that I had to be adaptable,
Yeah.
right? And my attitude has always been, it still is now, is whenever people ask me, I will say, I'm not sure if I know what I'm doing or if I am qualified, but I'm willing to try and I'll learn. And you'll let me know if I'm not following the path. set boundaries, but I'm willing to try it. And that's always been my motto.
Yeah, it's a
Yeah.
very growth mindset, like mindset, which I really think is such a crucial thing. But I think, coming to the States as an immigrant, like you were much older than me when I was adopted and came to the States, like 14, not speaking any English. Like that's completely different than me that came, as an infant. And so yeah, just having that kind of transition of being at an awkward age of 14 and then coming into the States
Yeah.
and being like, hey, I'm awkward and different. I also have food that smells different than yours. Like it looks and
Yeah.
smells different than yours. Here I am. Oh, and by the way, I don't speak English either.
Yeah. No, it's funny because sometimes when meet my high school friends, and they see me now and they're like, wow, you talk a lot. Because I didn't talk when I was in high school because I didn't speak the language well enough.
Yes, yes. You're the second person that's been on Perspective in Practice that's an immigrant that kind of moved at that awkward age. And Ollie was like, I was the kid with the stinky food. Like people just didn't understand me.
Hmm.
So, but he had that resilience to him too. He's like, if I can't talk to you, and I can't really like relate to you like culturally, like one thing I can do is I can earn my respect, and he earned it through athletics. And that's kind of how
Oh.
he built up his resilience. So,
That's amazing because it's interesting because as a leader now, and it's strange to say that I'm one of the older, right, people in my group. And when I see younger generation, Generation Z that's coming into the workforce, when I first meet them, I tell them, you can make it this role in your career path however you want it. But the way that I started, not sure if that's the right thing for you, but the way that I started was I was the first one in the office and the last one to leave.
yes.
You showed up, you were present, you were there. And I mentioned how that impression that you said in the beginning of your career dictates actually how you are perceived through the rest of your, career pathway in that organization. Because it is hard to break that kind of the stereotypical bias that gets formed, when people get to meet you in the beginning. And it's really hard because I think I am all for work-life balance, but a lot of times, as a small nonprofit that does a lot of events, we have to be places where you're present. And
Hmm.
that presence, it doesn't matter if you're an executive, if you're an entry-level person, your clients, your peers notice.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of one thing that I'm really trying to help younger workers who are entering into the field. Um, of course, you have to, again, set boundaries, but be present when
Yeah.
you're there, right?
Yeah. It kind of goes up to that, like those that show up, go up kind of
Yes.
being there consistently, people seeing your face, people building a relationship with you over time. That's really what builds the trust. For them to like give you a shot later down the road kind of thing when they need you.
Yeah. And it's funny what you said about trust. Trust is not something that's given, it's something that's earned,
Yes.
right? And a lot of times people just want it
Yeah.
without proving that they've earned it.
Yes. Yeah.
And even as a leader, just because you have a title doesn't mean you've earned that
Yes.
trust just because you have the title, right? You have to work on it. And it's definitely something that goes beyond workplace, right? It's you as a human being and how you show up in relationships.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. Absolutely.
We're
Absolutely.
going philosophical now.
So let's go back a little bit to your
Yeah.
like sales and marketing. So what were some of the biggest lessons from your time in sales and marketing that still influence how you lead?
I think that people do business with people, right? It's not the company that you work for. Some people think, oh, I work for this big fancy company that everybody knows. Therefore, I can go in anywhere.
Yeah.
It doesn't work like that. They need to know you.
Yeah.
And so I think that's the biggest lesson I learned was, again, having that presence, having that relationship, and building trust,
Yeah.
right? And I went through a lot of sales trainings, and that's something that I really took away.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
So for some of our like younger viewers that are, asking the question, what do I do to build trust? What would you say are some tips and tricks just as a salesperson? Because a lot of times in sales, like it's like you have like a big red dot on your face and people are like, "Oh, here comes the sales rep, like run away." So what are a couple tips and tricks that you have that have helped you build relationships with people? Because I know that was a question I always had when I was like younger. I was like, I don't know how to do that. Like, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think, this idea that you have to be somebody else, like,
Mhm.
I don't know if there's a persona that you have from movies or TV shows you've watched that a salesperson has to be a certain way. You have to dress a certain way. You have to present your certain way. I don't think that's real. I don't think that's true. I think people can see through to you. They know that you're not authentic.
Yeah,
So I would say be you,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
And what I also tell my team is you can't be everything to everybody.
that's
Not everybody's going to like you.
yeah,
That's just reality,
yeah,
right? Doesn't matter how hard you try, sometimes it's not going to work. You need to understand who you are and bring your authentic self and connect with people in an authentic way,
yeah,
right? And then know if you have hard days, when something has happened, to you personally or to your neighbors, that all of that experience gets brought into your day job,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
And the person you're meeting has things happening as well too. They could be a mother, they could be a father, they could be a child, a child of a parent who is going through difficult times. Like that experience shapes them. So I
yeah.
think building relationship and connecting and really being curious about your client as a human being, I think that's important.
Yes.
So that's what I do when I try to meet people is I don't see it as a transaction. I really try to get to know people as a person.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
I love the John Maxwell phrase, everyone communicates, few connect. Because it just really hits to like, are you building a relationship with that specific human first? Do you know anything about them besides like where they
Exactly.
work and what their role is? Do you know if they have kids, a family? Do you know what their hobbies, sports, activities, what do they like to do when they're not at work? And like finding like my always thing is I just keep asking questions until I find something that I can relate with them on, either myself or maybe try like in a triangle, like, oh, somebody else that I know also loves this too. And then, trying to build at least those initial conversations off of something that they like and enjoy that, maybe you do too. So,
Yeah, so as human beings, so in the work that I do, we talk a lot about managing your biases
yeah,
so that you can be more inclusive.
yeah,
Actually, the most common bias most people have is affinity bias. We
yeah,
tend to gravitate towards people who are similar to
yeah,
us.
yeah,
Like I love dogs. If I meet somebody else who's a dog lover, then I'm automatically going to think that that person is somehow better than somebody else who doesn't like dogs, you know? And so that's an interesting perspective. That's just human nature,
yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I have a wiener dog, and I always just say, everybody that has a wiener dog, like you can instantly trust them
Yeah.
because, because
Exactly.
a
See?
specific type of person that owns a dog that has legs this big.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
I had Chihuahua, so I totally get it. Yeah.
And Ellie comes with me to like all of my sales events, networking events, things like that, because I honestly believe too with her. Like she's our chief morale officer, but she breaks down like barriers
hmm
and she's a conversation starter. And who
hmm
doesn't love a dog with one inch
Yeah.
nails? Like
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly.
comes in her backpack and people are like, oh
Yeah.
my. And I'm like, oh, hi, nice to meet you. Let's
Yeah.
talk about my dog because she's cute.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, but let's talk a little bit
Sure.
about like strategy, business strategy, because
Mhm.
you helped like a 50-year-old Montessori program develop into a new like nonprofit. Tell us a little bit about what that, tell us about the journey and how you kind of got into it and like what are some things you learned along the way?
Yeah. So again, an opportunity. It wasn't like I was looking to do that work. My children were at the Montessori school that was actually owned and operated by one of the largest healthcare systems in the Pacific Northwest.
Yeah.
So it doesn't make sense that a healthcare system, a hospital system would own, you know, preschool and Montessori school. But when it was founded like 150 years ago, sisters thought we take care of sick and the young, right? And that seems okay at that time. But now the concept of healthcare vertical and education are very different, and
Mhm.
the laws that you have to follow. And so the healthcare wanted to actually either sell or close the school.
Yeah.
And so the school administrator was asking for help. And at that time, I happened to have a lot more time and I have a lot of experience with kind of project management and business strategy. And so, just by default, because there were no other volunteers, I ended up taking on this role. And it became almost a full-time job because starting a brand new nonprofit organization away from an existing group, just separating out everything from financials to creating a new employee handbook to negotiating new lease to making sure that all the benefits for the staff were set up, a new website, new actually brand because it needed to be separated. It was almost like starting up a brand new organization.
Yeah.
And um,
But I
it
think a
was
nonprofit is even harder because there's so many more rules and regulations that go with it.
That's correct. One of the first things we did was we did a survey of the existing parents to see what they liked. And because we didn't want to do something that the community didn't want,
Yeah.
right? You always start with some sort of feedback, right? You have to have some things. So you as an individual who's leading it is not making decisions that's just based on your personal opinion and
Yeah.
experience. And then we created a kind of an advisory board made up of uh, mostly the parents.
Yeah.
And, we had people who were like CPAs, who were dentists, like they were leaders in their own field, but they've never actually started a nonprofit or have been on a nonprofit board. And so we had to do a lot of exercises, like figuring out, even like coming up with a new name.
Yeah.
That was an exercise. And then once we had that, we needed to figure out who we were. So we came up with values,
Hmm.
right, that were going to guide us. And then we came with a vision and then a mission statement. And
Hmm.
once you have those things figured out, which, for a lot of nonprofits, having kind of your values that ground your work and
Hmm.
then having a vision and a mission, that sets your strategy, right?
Yeah.
Your strategy should align with your mission, vision, and values.
Yeah.
In a corporate environment, it's a little different, but for nonprofit, that really is in some ways a lot more intuitive and easy once you have those framework.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
There's a book. I don't think I have it up here in my office, but it's called Traction for some people that might be wanting a resource to help them like set up that mission, vision, values thing. And it's a really good book. And I don't know if you've ever seen it, but for those that might be listening and are saying, I've been around for a while, or I'm just starting, but I don't have those. Is there something that can guide my process through that? That's a really good resource, I think, for people wanting to do that. Or maybe people that have been in business a long time and are like, are these things that we set years ago still actually valid? Because I think it's
Totally.
important to go back and look at them and say, is this still relevant?
I think that's true for nonprofits too.
Mm,
Times change, your audiences change, and the needs of the community change,
yep.
right? And businesses might need to pivot as well too. So I do think at least once a year, you can just at your annual meeting or your, like board retreat or leadership gathering, you should just say, hey, these are our values, these are our vision, these are our mission.
Yeah.
Does this still resonate with you? Are we going the wrong way? Do we need to change any of the words? Words change too, right?
Yeah.
So, or maybe it's just this is still who we are. Just affirm it, right? And
Mhm.
say we're doing the right thing. And I
Yeah.
think that's a very big step or
Yeah,
important step.
yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely. And for us, even at Break the Norm, like when we take on new projects, our leadership team comes together and says, is the project that somebody's asking for us in alignment with our mission, vision, and values? And if it's not, are we okay with going in a new direction? Because that means we need to readjust internally to make sure that we're understanding how that reflects or not. So yeah, I love how you're kind of saying, hey, yeah, you need to, check that on a regular basis to ensure that.
Yeah, and as I said, like you can't be everything to everybody. You need to know who you are as an organization. And sometimes just because you have an opportunity where it could be, additional income or revenue source, that may not be the right pathway because
Mhm.
you could dilute your brand if
Yeah.
you are doing something that's not in your core values or your vision, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So what would you say are some of the most common mistakes you see nonprofits make when they're trying to scale or restructure?
I think again, what I just said was basically you can't be everything to everybody.
Yeah.
Sometimes just think bigger is better.
Yeah.
And I can say from my experience working in corporate environment, I've seen many, like dozens of organizations that grew too fast and
Hmm.
then it failed,
Yeah.
right? You want your growth to be intentional, you want it to be managed, and you need to make sure that you're readdressing the growth in alignment again with your vision, mission, and values.
Yeah.
Does it align with your strategic core? Like, for example, you can't have a sushi restaurant all of a sudden start selling pho, you know,
Yeah.
I don't know, or barbecue. I don't know. So like, something very different. Then you lose your, right? It's like the same thing. I get confused when I go to those restaurants sometimes when they sell everything. Like, what kind of restaurant is this? Right.
Yes.
But then, like when you're looking to go eat sushi, you probably are looking for a restaurant that does well just in sushi. That's
Yeah.
hard enough as well.
Yes.
So I think organization is the same thing, right? You can't dilute yourself and people start getting confused about who you are.
Yes.
And
No,
yeah.
it's funny you say that because the other day I was at a Japanese sushi restaurant, but they were playing Korean music. I was greeted in Korean, and then they had like Korean things on the wall, and as if like they were like, well, nobody will notice. I was like, I noticed. I'm confused. What's happening?
Well,
Uh,
at least they're sticking with one food, right?
yeah, I was
Food
like,
wise, yeah.
they're like, yeah, like they advertised as like this Japanese like sushi restaurant, and then I was like, when I got there, I was like, I told my friend who's Colombian, I was like, I don't understand, and she was like, what do you mean? I was like, that's Korean on the wall. She just greeted me in Korean. So yes, yes.
Yeah.
Um, let's talk about DEI because you served on over like 30 nonprofit boards, government commissions, racial justice councils. How has that shaped your view on equity inclusion in leadership? And because I feel like there's just like this big like tension in DEI right now, obviously. Um, and then I feel like, even just since George Floyd, like there's almost hostility sometimes in the DEI space of like, were you in DEI before George Floyd? You know,
Mm.
are you in DEI now? And then, just with everything with the new leadership of America, like there's people that are just like, I quit. They're not even trying anymore. So I guess I'm interested in your thoughts on how that has shaped your views on DEI leadership, how you guys are approaching it.
That's a lot of different questions. I'll
I know.
say, first
I'm
of all,
sorry.
yeah, that's okay. So, this concept of DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion, the reason people are fighting it is because they don't understand what it means.
Yes.
Diversity is a fact,
Yes.
right? You can have identical twins and they're two different people,
Yes.
right? That diversity comes because of not only our experiences, our upbringing, but the way that we think. The fact that one person might be drawn to to dogs versus cats,
Yeah.
that's diversity.
Yeah.
We only think that diversity is race and ethnicity, but
Yes.
diversity comes from all aspects, right? So
Yes.
whether people want to fight it or not, diversity is a fact. You
Hmm.
can't argue fact. Equity just means, right, you are creating opportunities for people so that they can be successful.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of times people get confused with equity with equality, which is not the same thing at
Yeah.
all. And what I would normally tell people when I do DEI training for folks who are kind of hesitant about it, I remind them, hey, do you have same bicycle as your 2-year-old son, as your 6'2" husband,
Yeah.
or your neighbor who might be 80 years old, right? You know when you go and get a bicycle, you get one that's made for you.
Yeah.
That is equity.
Yeah.
Everybody has an opportunity to ride bicycle, but it's what you're given, what you get to work with that's different so that you can be successful. That's
Yeah.
equity,
Yeah.
right? And so I think you have to talk about or be aware of diversity, equity, and inclusion in any role, especially on a board where you're making decisions for a lot of money,
Yeah.
right? Because when you're on a board, majority of decisions you make is where the money goes, okay, what your priorities are, and how you set policies and procedures to distribute that funds. Usually that's what a board does.
Yeah.
Um, right? And so then I think every board should go through some sort of DEI training
Yeah.
because you are representing people and perspective audiences, customers, clients that you may not know about,
Yeah.
right? So, for example, in my role serving as a commissioner for local housing authority, I may not have the same experience as, let's say, somebody who's come out of or is trying to escape from domestic violence,
Yeah.
right? The needs that they might have and the services they might need and the type of housing they might need may be very different.
Yeah.
And so we need to be mindful of the fact that we need to be aware that those are our potential audiences and what are the type of security things that you said. Like, how do you make sure that place that they call home,
Yeah.
which, for homes for us are like our sanctuary. It's our safe place.
Yeah.
How do we make sure that place feels safe for them?
Yeah.
Right. And then it's not just me, but if, let's say, I'm sitting in a boardroom with all men and I'm the only woman, which has happened more than once, um, that perspective of bringing woman's perspective in a boardroom when everybody seems to be coming from a financial background and money and they're lawyers and they're like, well, we're not doing anything illegal, so therefore that's fine. And my
Mhm.
thing is, that's not enough,
Yeah.
right? That should be bare minimum
Yeah. That's
that we're not doing it. Yeah,
like just so we don't go to jail.
yeah. But a lot of board members, I have to tell you, are not doing it because they really care about the mission and vision and values of those organizations. It's because it looks good on their resume and they can say
Yes.
that I serve on these boards. And I sit in boardrooms at a lot of those people.
Yes.
And honestly, I try not to interact with them outside of the boardroom
Yes.
just because they're not normally type of people that I want to interact with. Having said that, in that space, I need to interject quite a bit and be strong because
Yeah.
otherwise they're not going to consider perspectives and facts that need to be discussed to make important decisions.
Yes.
And it's incredibly frustrating at times when I'm acting like in that, limited space of 3, 4 hour board meeting, you
Yeah.
have to like educate these people on all these things.
Yes.
And some people honestly don't want to listen and don't want to care.
Yeah.
And so that's one of the reasons that I do think that all boards need to go through some board training.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
How do you guide a room of leaders to make space so that other people feel empowered to contribute? Do you have any tips or tricks or things that you have done to, um, you know, encourage the quieter voices to speak up, whether you're in a boardroom or you're facilitating a conversation within a team? Do you have things that you've specifically done? Because I feel like in those spaces that you were just talking about, oftentimes um the other voices are not heard.
Mm. I do that actually quite often in meetings. I'll be like, "Oh, I can see like you're thinking
Yeah.
across the room. I see your face. Do
Yes.
you have any thoughts?" And I specifically call people out
Yeah.
because I can tell that they want to say something or they're uncomfortable, but they're not saying anything. So I just try to encourage them and give them opportunity so that they have an opportunity to say. And then
Yeah.
I'll mention sometimes if I feel like some people are like, well, I don't know if I want to talk right now, then I'll actually have a separate meeting. Because as a board member, I think I can reach out to a fellow board member outside of the boardroom to
Yeah.
have those conversations and try to encourage that person to speak up, and then maybe send out an email to the
Yeah.
group if they're not able to speak. Because
Yeah.
not everybody can speak off the cuff in a
Yeah.
larger room,
Yeah.
right? Sometimes they're better at articulating via writing and they want to think about it.
Yeah.
Sometimes they just need time to think and come back.
Yeah.
So, as a facilitator that does a lot of board retreat facilitation, that's kind of a skill that I picked up.
Yeah.
Is I'm always trying to make sure that people who are not speaking,
Yeah.
have an opportunity to speak. I can say, oh, I noticed this, you and this particular person didn't speak as much before we end the meeting. Do you have anything you would like to add?
Yeah.
Right? I think it's really important to do that. Or sometimes, as women, when you're sitting in a boardroom, another woman who tries to speak gets ignored by a majority of the men, or they're like, oh, they get cut off, or they're not taken seriously. Then I would have to interject and say, well, she had a really great point that she was bringing up. Can we make sure that she finishes her thought?
Hmm.
Or if a man later on says something that the woman said earlier, and somehow like everybody's like, that's a great idea. I would be like, you know what? That that's great that you agree. This other person had that idea, right?
Yeah.
And so I remind people that
Yeah.
that came
Perfect.
from another person.
Yeah.
And that's a very common situation, unfortunately, that we face in boardrooms.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely. I've had that so many times where I'm like, the man says it and as if it's his idea. And I'm like, what are you talking about? I just said that 5 seconds ago.
Exactly. Yep. So then you have to interject and say, oh, thank you for agreeing with my point of view or my
Yeah.
backing me up, And then they'll be like, okay.
Yes. So let's talk a little bit of advice for business owners or nonprofit leadership. So, how do you create space for people you lead to realize their own potential, even when they don't see it themselves?
That's a hard one. There's a saying that's common, right? You can lead horse to the water, but you can't make them drink it.
Yeah.
Uh, I wish I could say I have answer for all aspects of it, but I don't.
Yeah.
I think you can only give them guidance,
Hmm.
right? And everybody's different, so you have to try a different types of advice. Sometimes you can model the behavior. You can set example of or give examples of scenarios, or you can make suggestions
Yeah.
on how they can grow. And at the end of the day, what I also say is, as a leader, it's great if people thrive under you,
Hmm.
right? Under your leadership, but sometimes they may not be in a right organization.
Yeah.
you know Maybe they're not in a right role in the
Yeah.
first place. Maybe they
Yes.
thought that that's what they wanted, but maybe that's not. And I think as a leader, sometimes you have to give those people an opportunity to say, hey, maybe this is not what you want. Have
Hmm.
you really thought about what your career trajectory is, and is this in line? Is this helping you for your growth?
Yeah.
And if it isn't, maybe it's an opportunity for you, and you have to help them grow even if it's not under your leadership. I
Yeah.
think that's the important part. I've
Yeah.
had a person who came in who was a lovely human being, very talented artistically, had never worked in any desk job, and came in as an executive assistant. And this person didn't know how to do time management, didn't know calendaring, didn't know how to do emails to people. And liked being with our organization, but struggled in that
Hmm.
role.
Hmm.
And I had to have an honest conversation. Do you feel happy to be particularly in your role in our organization? And that person said, no, actually, I'm not. I feel like I'm struggling. And and then we had to have that conversation,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And my thing is, I want to have them be successful,
Yeah.
right? I want to support them. And if it means them being somewhere else, that's
Hmm.
okay too. But
Hmm.
then sometimes they need that guidance to realize that, because you don't want to have them sit in a role that they're miserable in, right? Yeah. Another thing that I've seen a lot, and I'm not really sure if you've heard this from other leaders, that I find a lot is a lot of younger people I see, maybe it's from TV shows or they're seeing dot-commers or tech
Yeah.
people. Everybody wants to make six figures fresh out of college.
Yes.
And it's really hard for me to say that the type of roles that they're coming into, there's a salary range, right? So when they apply for the job, they knew what they were getting paid. And
Hmm.
then I can't all of a sudden bump you up to six-figure salary,
Hmm.
right? You need to have experiences or some sort of accomplishment or, like you have to show me that you deserve that raise and you're doing that work, right? And sometimes so setting that expectation and boundary and reminding them, I think is also important as well too.
Yeah.
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 But I'm also very transparent as a small organization because I had that opportunity given to me. I go over our budget and how I prioritize things and what each budget I line item means with all my team members.
Hmm.
Maybe they don't really care. Maybe they're not numbers people, but
Yeah.
I do try to go over and give them reasoning on
Yeah.
where things are.
Yeah.
And just because I do think that it's an opportunity for them to learn. And I always ask them, is there something that you would like to try that you're not doing right now in your role? Let me
Yes.
know. I'm happy to help have you an opportunity to expand and try something,
Yeah.
right? And
Yeah.
so that's another thing I try to do as well too.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's really important that people just understand where their strengths are.
Yeah.
Um, just understanding, like I like to call it your superhero power. Like, what are you like
Hmm.
just really good at? And like, how can you apply that to the workforce? And sometimes that's being creative, kind of like your original boss was, of like, how can we use those strengths to impact the business, to impact the organization? Because likely that role has never existed before in the organization.
Hmm.
And
Yeah.
now you can really use those strengths to thrive and, help impact the organization. So I love that because I'm always very conscientious of that, even for myself as a business owner. Like I might be doing something and be frustrated, and then I go to my team and I'm like, I'm not supposed to be doing this. This isn't where I thrive. But being aware of that.
Yes, I
I
think that's the thing is that as a human being, we're all flawed,
Yeah.
right? I always tell my kids, a lot of young people, my children included, think that they are so amazing and they're so great at something. And I always remind them not to burst their bubble. Yes, you are really good at it, but just keep in mind there's always somebody better than you at some things,
Hmm.
right? And that concept is hard for people,
Hmm.
right? And I always say, it's this idea of being confident
Hmm.
without being arrogant. There's
Hmm.
a difference,
Hmm.
right? You can be confident in your ability. You can be confident as a person. You can be confident as, a writer, a speaker, whatever the role might be. But that doesn't mean you have to be arrogant about it,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
And right, but again, that comes maybe with a little maturity and
Yep.
experience as well to
Yep.
know,
Yep.
because you can't really tell them, you know what, you're not all that. I'm sorry, that's not how you want to. So you could be like, oh, you're really good at these things. Have you thought about working more on this aspect? Like you can kind of guide them in the conversation.
Yeah.
Um, yeah.
Yeah.
So, but yes, I do think that it's an individualized thing. It's almost like therapy being
Yeah. Yeah.
a leader.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, it's funny. And especially for women, like I was a foster parent for a while and, I had a middle school boy and he had so much confidence in certain things. And I was like, and then so my sister and I kind of made the joke of like, just have the confidence of a middle school boy. Like, go do it.
Yeah.
Like, where does that confidence come from?
Some
Um,
people never grow out of it.
yeah,
I'm sorry.
it's just funny, just funny.
Yeah.
And Gen Z is really bringing a whole new values and expectations to the
Yes.
workforce. And with just so many generations in the workforce these days, we're really having to rethink how we create an inclusive environment for everyone, for
Hmm.
different
Yeah.
educations, for different abilities,
Yep.
and it's been challenging.
Yes. No, I hear you. I think it's because also the COVID has upended this idea of community. I
Hmm.
say that COVID had really unfortunately made people like unaware of their surroundings. Like people have become worse drivers. People have
Yes,
become worse community members. Like
yes,
it's because they're so about, living in their own house and being a certain way. They don't want to have to compromise or to think about other people,
yeah.
right? And so I think that kind of shows up in workplace as well too, unfortunately.
Why do you
This
think
const
that happened? Because I had this happen to me the other day where I was doing a bystander training with some middle schoolers, and I did the whole like you knock the cup over and the pencils fall out and you see how many kids will stand up to help you. 55 kids, zero stood up to help me. And some of them just laughed at me as I picked up and I like kept looking up to see like I have five more pencils. Come on, man. Will somebody have empathy for me and help me? Zero.
Empathy is, yeah, I mean, empathy is definitely a big thing. I think the most important thing for a leader is empathy. I wanted to talk about that as well too at some point. But the fascinating thing is these COVID generation, younger people, many people have gone through their entire college life in COVID pandemic era. Some kids learned to develop their social skills or lack thereof during the pandemic era. And I do think that there needs to be a little bit of an expectation reset
Mm-hmm.
that, we do. We are communal animals. Human beings are communal animals. You're not living in the woods by yourself,
Mm-hmm.
right? We live in a place where you have neighbors, you have coworkers, you have peers, you have people around you. And I think it's just this idea of you can't just lead yourself in the world where it's just you by yourself and it's all about me,
Mm-hmm.
right? And some of it, I think, for children especially, that needs to be modeled by the parents, right?
Mm-hmm.
To remind them, yes, we love you and you are great and you can believe yourself to be special, but you
Mm-hmm.
need to know other parents have kids whose children are equally precious to them,
Mm-hmm.
right? And it's that understanding that's kind of hard to do. And I think empathy is something that has to be definitely modeled
Mm-hmm.
and practiced,
Mm-hmm.
right? It's an exercise you have to do. Put
Yeah.
yourself in somebody else's shoes.
Yes.
And one of the best ways I think you can do that in young children as well as adults is volunteer work.
Yes.
I always say, people are like, oh, I'm too busy. I don't have time for this. Maybe you take a day of your work week, right? Maybe once a quarter. I don't know if you don't have time, do it twice a year,
Mm-hmm.
right? Take that time and do a team building experience of doing volunteer work and
Mm-hmm.
seeing the needs of the community that you don't necessarily think about. I
Yeah.
think when you're actually seeing these people in places who desperately need that one meal, that warm, fresh pair of socks, or, like in the place that I live, I'm just looking at outside my window. We have all these ivy. Ivies kill trees. We do ivy removal, volunteer work, whatever it may be. I think it really, having that experience and being out there really
Mm-hmm.
can help you understand the necessity of empathy
Yeah.
and help you build it.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah, yeah.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much, Jenny, for sharing your journey and your leadership insights. It's been a pleasure hearing from you and your experiences and lessons you've learned along the way. And for our viewers, if you enjoyed hearing Jenny's insights today, don't miss other Break the Norm leadership interviews. And if your organization is interested in learning more about how Break the Norm leadership can help you develop your greatest asset, your people, click the link below. Thanks so much, Jenny.
Thank you.